The tier one running backs in fantasy football are going to be the guys, really the first 5 or 6 guys that go off the board. And it's been like that every single year. We've had episodes where we talk about the scarcity of the running back position. If you just look at fantasy points per game, we know running backs typically will hit a higher peak, and there's more of them that can hit there, especially because there's less projecting we need to do as far as volume and touches and where they stand on the depth chart like we do with wide receivers. And, quarterbacks, we talk about streaming that position all the time. So, Alex, who's in that tier one when we look at our consensus thoughts on these players?
Here's tier one for me. It's Christian McCaffrey. And to be honest with you, Christian McCaffrey is almost he pretty much is in a tier of his own. Like if you have the first overall pick, take McCaffrey, don't think twice, but kind of for the sake of time and the sake of these tiers, we're just going to group him in with tier one. It's McCaffrey, it's Dalvin Cook, Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, Ezekiel Elliott, and Alvin Kamara. Those 6 guys, in my opinion, and Stef, I think you're in agreement with me here, those should be the first 6 picks in most drafts this season.
100%. And with most of these guys, they have the same situation they were in last year. Dalvin Cook, the Minnesota Vikings have retooled that defense over the offseason. They look to continue to be a run-first team. No change at the QB spot. Should be a fun offense. Christian McCaffrey, he has had a QB change, but we know that he's going to get utilized. Quarterback has never mattered for Christian McCaffrey. He is the engine of that Panthers offense. He's going to see an insane opportunity share. He's going to see a ton of targets and receptions. And if you just look at what he did when he was healthy last year and look at 2019, we should continue to expect that production, that volume to be there. Derrick Henry, almost the exact same situation. Tennessee Titans did retool a little bit in the draft and in free agency on the defensive side of the ball. They brought in Julio Jones. If anything, that should help the Titans offense be better, sustain drives, and give Derrick Henry more goal line opportunities. Ezekiel Elliott, though he was coming off a disappointing 2020, he was still a top 10 running back in fantasy football, has been at or on pace 300 carries for the last, I think it's like 5 years. He should have done that last year, but it was clear once Dak went down, once this team, I don't want to say they went into tank mode, but they were trying to keep Zeke fresh. But the one that I see on this list, and this tier one, these top 6 picks in your 2021 redraft leagues, assuming they are not super flex. We need to throw that caveat in there for all the super flex players. We see you. We see you. We'll have some of those mocks coming out soon. But Alvin Kamara, okay, he's had a huge change from Drew Brees to now an ambiguous quarterback situation. Who knows? Right now, I'm operating as if Jameis is going to be the starter just based on some of the beat reports I've seen. And I don't think Taysom Hill can be a 16, 17-week starter. But Alex, who do you think is going to be starting at the quarterback position? And let's really dive into Kamara because he's the last one that's on this list and the guy that I've seen left off this list in a lot of drafts.
I'm still a huge believer for this season. I think the starting quarterback is going to be Jameis Winston. If I had to pick a side, that's the side I'm picking. But I really don't know, man. I don't think anybody knows because last year we had the same exact scenario and Taysom Hill got the job. So it's really hard to say. I think for Alvin Kamara's value, Jameis Winston would be the better solution. But the Saints are trying to win football games, not win fantasy football championships. So that's what makes it tough to project with Kamara. So to me, like Kamara is still in this tier one, even if Taysom Hill starts all 16 games. But if we do see Jameis Winston play any amount of games as the starting quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, I think Kamara just kind of shifts towards the top end of this tier rather than the low end. And Kamara's been the definition of efficiency throughout his entire career. He's not one of these workhorse backs that gets all these carries, but he gets those high-value touches. He gets the touches in the red zone. He gets the touches through the receiving game. And if you look at Kamara's game, he always is at the top in so many different metrics, especially efficiency metrics. If we look at his amazing 2020 season, he was number 1 in receiving yards, number 1 in receptions, number 1 in total touchdowns amongst running backs. He was
82 receptions a year. Lock it in.
It's crazy. Yeah, guaranteed 81 plus so far in his career. He was 10th in red zone carries, but first in red zone touchdowns. Number 1 in weighted opportunities per player profiler. That kind of balances out receptions versus carries because receptions are more valuable and it gives you the total value of a player's touches, Kamara was number 1 amongst running backs, number 2 in juke rate, number 2 in yards per touch. I could go on and on about all these top 5s for Alvin Kamara, but he's been a top 10 PPR running back for all 4 years of his career. Even during that injury-plagued 2019 season, he was still a top 10 PPR running back. So I think Kamara's a lock for 170 plus carries and 100 plus targets in 2021. And I know the biggest concern for Kamara, like we've mentioned, is Taysom Hill. And we saw a very small sample size from Taysom Hill as the starter in 2020. It wasn't great for Kamara's value, but I think there were other extenuating factors that came into play in that scenario. If we really break down those 4 games one by one, we see what was happening with the Saints offense. That first game, it was against Atlanta. The Saints won 24-9. They led the whole second half. Kamara had a low snap share. He was barely even needed in that Atlanta game. So they just kind of let Latavius Murray take over, ground and pound that clock, and that's why Latavius Murray is on this roster. In game 2, it was against Denver, that Kendall Hinton quarterback game where the Saints absolutely curb stomped him and ran the clock out for the entire game. So Kamara,
that was one of the worst games of all time.
So Kamara barely even got utilized in that game, wasn't needed at all. In Atlanta, in the third start for Taysom Hill, 2 games against Atlanta in that 4-game stretch, Kamara posted 17 PPR points, actually had a solid game, was heavily involved on the ground. And then the last game for Taysom Hill against Philly, the Saints did not lead in the entire game. Taysom Hill was forced to play from behind and throw 38 pass attempts, and Kamara saw 10 targets in that game, 22 PPR fantasy points. So I think the game scripts were playing a huge factor in that stretch. I think Taysom Hill had some part of it, but I think the game scripts came into effect as well, which is why we were, generally disappointed with Alvin Kamara over that stretch. But it's worth saying he was still RB11 in PPR in those 4 games. So I do think Taysom vultures some goal line touchdowns from Kamara on the ground if he's the starting quarterback. But if it's Jameis Winston, it's wheels up. I think the volume in this offense goes up all around. So none of that is going to scare me away from Kamara this season. I think he is a safe, locked and loaded top 6 running back in PPR formats, and he's going to continue to have that RB1 upside on this Saints offense.
I couldn't agree more, man. He needs to be in this tier 1 because when you look at the Saints situation, Kamara's pretty much their wide receiver too. I mean, he's their number 2 passing game option.
Yeah.
Had over 100 targets last year. And then on top of what he's doing on the ground, I mean, you've seen the monster Kamara runs, right? Remember the $1 million smile with the grill after the 52-yard breakaway against the Packers on, I think that was Sunday Night Football. Like, we know what Kamara is capable of. We're excited for Adam Troutman. We take flyers on Traquan Smith and Marquez Callaway in some of these best ball leagues or in the last round. But the Saints really didn't do anything to address any of their pass-catching weapons. They didn't bring in any big free agents. So I'm excited for Kamara's pass-catching volume. I think that could even go up. And we saw him with his highest career year in receptions in a year where Drew Brees didn't even play the entirety of the season. And we did have those bottoming out Taysom Hill games with 1 or 2 targets in those games. The one easy counterpoint on this Taysom Hill impacts the pass-catching volume thing, it's as simple as looking at the game log in that game against Philly where you alluded to it, right? The 38 pass attempts in week 14. Kamara saw 10 targets from Taysom Hill. So clearly that was almost like the Ezekiel Elliott situation where the team didn't need to put a huge workload on this guy's shoulders, a guy that they're paying a lot of money to be a workhorse back that can carry them in those high leverage situations. We're never going to see a true RB1 unless maybe it's Derrick Henry. And even he has games where he's utilized less, but like all these guys are going to need a breather at times. No human, at least very few of them ever to walk this earth have been capable of carrying 25 plus touches consistently and not breaking down over what's now a 17-game season. So if you believe it's Jameis starting like we do, and even if Taysom Hill is sprinkled in the red zone or used on these trick plays, I think it's completely fine for Kamara. This offense, I actually think, has a very strange path to some upside if they can somehow be an even better offense because they're more electric without Drew Brees, lack of arm strength holding them back. And look, regardless, it's going to be Kamara as one of the funneled volume options on this team. I'm locking him in for another 81 receptions and an RB1 fantasy season. Now, one guy we haven't talked about in this final tier a guy that is falling in some drafts, and it's really because of the injury discount. And my concern levels are not high. I'm not fading Saquon Barkley. But there is some uncertainty whether he will be ready for week 1. That is going to be something we need to monitor as we get closer to the season. We'll continue to update these tiers in our Discord. Link to that in the description. But with Saquon, he had an ACL injury that's pretty significant, but usually it takes these guys about a year to come back. And we even have seen names like Adrian Peterson have historic seasons right after tearing their ACL. We saw Cooper Kupp come back after an ACL tear and have a really strong fantasy season. With Saquon Barkley, he's not like every other player, so why are we going to compare him to every other player? To me, it just says, look, we need to see more information. We need to get closer to week 1 before we begin to fade him, because his offense has gotten better with some of the investments that they've made over the offseason, getting Kenny Golladay, getting Kadarius Toney to come in on that offense. Everyone should be healthy, like Evan Ingram, Sterling Shepard. Daniel Jones will have one more year to see if he can pull it off, but we know regardless, with Jason Garrett back there, they're going to continue to feed the running back in the passing game, especially a generational talent like Saquon.